Welcome to our podcast, Raising Bigs. This podcast is an ongoing conversation between myself and my young adult son. We're ready and willing to talk about all things families might experience in their lives and relationships, both as parents and young adults, from teens to 20 somethings, the good, the bad, and sometimes the ugly. In this episode, we're covering the topic of anxiety. Having both just watched the new movie Inside Out 2, we thought the time was perfect to chat about something that affects so many households right now. We are living in anxiety inducing times. And while anxiety in teens and young adults is currently at crisis levels, kids aren't the only ones struggling. Whether you're living with anxiety yourself or loving your family member through it, it's important to know you're not alone. Let's dive into the discussion. I'm Marcy and I'm the mom.
I'm Cade, and I'm her kid. I know anxiety is a hot topic among me and my peers, and a lot of kids my age. I also know it's not something that families also openly talk about, although it is a really big situation going on within pretty much a lot of people in today's current age. Both adult kids and parents can suffer with anxiety. It's important to have open conversations about it so that there is a level of understanding and support. So that way, everyone in the family can be there for each other. And that can be really helpful, especially when you have anxiety, whether it is clinical anxiety, situational anxiety, or just overall you're feeling a little anxious. So, Mom, let's start with you. Why do you think anxiety is so prevalent right now?
Yeah, so I don't think anxiety is a new concept. I think we're talking about it a lot more than we used to. However, I do think that right now there's just a lot of craziness in the world. I think we're all living with a lot of uncertainty. I think life is unpredictable right now, not only in our families, in our jobs, in our communities, in our country, in the world as a whole, right? Life is very unpredictable right now. And so sometimes when we're living in limbo or unpredictability, it can really cause a lot of anxiety to crop up. So I think some of it is situational, right? There are people who are not genuinely or who are not generally anxious by nature, but they are feeling a lot of anxiety about what is going on around them and about things they can and cannot control. And then I think there are people who are actually dealing with clinical anxiety, obviously, and are usually in need of intervention beyond, what they're going to learn from our podcast today. Some of what we'll talk about today can be helpful for them, but they really are in need of further resources and further care. So there's the situational anxiety and the clinical anxiety. And a lot of what we say today applies to both. But I think it is so prevalent right now, which is the question you asked, just because we are living in unprecedented times. We don't necessarily know what the outcomes are going to be. We don't know what's going to happen, and we have a lot of fear around that. I think also there's still trying to balance out societal pressures, messaging that we're getting from society about how things should be that maybe feel out of alignment with who we are. So there's that constant battle going on between what is expected of us or what we assume is expected of us and what we actually are capable of doing, want to do, feel compelled to do, right? If you have a disconnect there, it can really cause some anxiety. So, do you think there's any other reasons, Cade, right now that anxiety is so prevalent?
Like you said, I don't think that necessarily people are more anxious or anxiety is more common or anything now. I just think it's more commonly talked about now and people are more open about it. So I think that that is a big thing. Anxiety is nothing new. It's nothing, it's not a brand new topic it's not a new feeling that was invented, 5, 10 years ago. It's been around. It's just one, I think, talked about more. But two, like you said, there's just so much going on in this world that, I think makes people a lot more anxious, whether you are anxious about the political state of your country, or you're anxious about your family, you're anxious about life, or you're anxious about the economy, or you're anxious about whatever it
Mhm.
is. I think that there is just so much going on. We just came out of a pandemic. I think that that gave a lot of people,
Mhm.
a certain amount of anxiety. So I think that there is just so much going on that has kind of
Mhm.
pushed people to just sometimes in general be more anxious, and that along with just people being more open about talking about it is what's made it more prevalent in our society today.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up the pandemic because I think, there's a lot of people who will just say, "Oh, the pandemic's over, move on." Well, I think that is a very short-sighted approach to what happens
Hmm.
because I think I have seen, especially having very young adults during that pandemic and myself being middle-aged, where there's a lot of changes that are happening anyway when you're middle-aged and had just come off a divorce. Like there was a lot of collective trauma, I think, that went on in society with all of the changes and the things that were affected and all the decisions we had to make that we weren't sure whether we were making the right decisions or not, whether that be vaccines or mask mandates or things like that. I think, your school shutting down was a prime example. Your work shutting down, like you had to learn how to be an 18-year-old that all of a sudden you had nothing except your mom and your dogs that
Hmm.
was relevant to you, right? Like everything else had kind of disappeared for a while. And so I think I'm glad you brought that up because I think that that gives us like a baseline for anxiety of what's going on right now. But then when you add things like the political climate or you add world events that are going on that had to do with human rights, there is just a sense a little bit of helplessness sometimes, I think, that can raise that level of anxiety too, because we can't individually change the big things that are happening. And I know we have a lot of power in our individual lives to change our own experiences on the daily, but it's those bigger things I think sometimes that really kind of lace throughout our daily lives and just raise our general sense of anxiousness above a
Hmm.
level where it maybe hasn't been before. Like I don't remember as a senior in high school having anxiety over anything more than what my prom dress was going to look like and the fact that I had to work 2 extra shifts this next week because someone was on
Hmm.
vacation. Like those were the things that were causing me anxiety. And I think now at a younger age, I think young adults are much more involved in what is going on in society and not wanting to settle for the status quo and feel a compulsion, right, to be able to make a change, to be able to be part of
Hmm.
the change. Do you agree that that kind of raises anxieties levels as well, or am I totally off the mark?
No, I think you're right with that. I think a lot of that too is society's kind of pressure, especially if we're talking about political things, is I personally hear a lot of like, oh, young kids need to get out and vote, or, young kids, they're going to be the ones that, flip the polls, or, whatever it is, or, young people have the social media power, whatever it may be. So I think
Mhm.
that there almost kind of is that pressure, like you said. And I think too, with young kids, high school age, if we're talking about, they're not able to vote, they're not able, sometimes not able to work to help provide for their families depending on their age. So I think that there is kind of that anxiety of feeling like things aren't going well but there's nothing you can do. And so I think that that kind of makes a bigger difference. If we're talking about the economy, that might be affecting your parents, and if you're in high school and you're 14, 15, you probably can't work. So it's like,
Mhm.
it's not like there's anything you can do to help make more money to, be able to do the things you want to do, or, things like that. So kind of like you said, your typical teenage things that made you anxious back in your day, kids still have that. They have, oh, I've got to work extra at work, or, oh, I've got a test coming up, or, oh, I'm going to ask this girl to prom, or, what's my dress going to look like, or whatever. But then there also is that additional stress added onto it
Mhm.
of everything that's going on in the world, or, being stressed about a pandemic, or being stressed about XYZ. So I think that that is, at least from my perspective, a big reason why a lot of kids my age and younger have, more anxiety, is because those typical, teenager reasons to be anxious didn't go away, but there's just been more added on top of it.
For sure. And we'll talk about it in a minute here because I've got another question I want to ask you first. But I also think there's an added stress of young adults seeing their parents dealing with anxiety. Like
Hmm.
society is different. I think the stresses are different. I think people in my parents' generation, they were better, for lack of a better word, better at hiding the anxiety and the things they were dealing with from their children than we are today. Now, I don't
Hmm.
necessarily think that's healthy. Like they might have been better at hiding it, but hiding it is not a good thing necessarily.
Hmm.
Like, you know, protecting your children from pain does not make them more able to deal with the pain that's going to hit them later down the road, right? Watching you deal with your pain, same thing applies for anxiety. But I do think there is the added pressure, right, of their kids observing their parents having financial stress, having job stress, having, stress over just being able to afford to live or stress over the political climate and who they're going to vote for and how do they get all their friends to go vote and stress over
Hmm.
homelessness. Like there's all kinds of things that bother me in society that I want to be part of fixing. And but I think inadvertently, right, like kids see their anxious parent and then feel anxious about having an anxious parent. So I do think that that is something additional that we are dealing with. And when we were all on lockdown in the house together, like there was no hiding it. Those were the only
Yeah,
the only people
exactly.
you were seeing, right? So like I wasn't getting to go out with my girlfriends and blow off all that steam, right, and process all that together. Although we did some of it on Zoom, but it was not the same as as it had
Mhm.
been previously. So what parents need to know, Cade, about helping their child deal with anxiety? If it's a parent who's got either a child who's just got situational anxiety, they're really anxious over one certain thing going on right now, or they've got a
Mhm.
child who actually is experiencing what the parent might suspect is clinical anxiety.
For sure. The first thing that came to mind is, as a parent, I feel like you need to kind of gauge yourself and where you're at, mentally and emotionally, and see if you are even able to help them. As a parent, if you haven't dealt with anxiety, you might not be the best person for them to talk to about that because you don't have that experience. You don't have,
Mm-hmm.
coping mechanisms. You don't have, advice or things like that. So I think that that is something because it almost can end up putting your child, deeper and end up hurting them more than it can help them. you know, let's say if you're a parent that doesn't deal with anxiety and your kid is very anxious, you might look at them and say, "Oh, well, just don't worry about it. It's,
Mm-hmm.
it's not that big a deal." That is going to end up doing more harm than good. So I think that as a parent, that's an important step is to figure out, are you emotionally and mentally ready to have that conversation and to help them? And if the answer is no, that's okay, but then put in the work to get them the help that they need,
Mm-hmm.
whether that is talking to another family member or a licensed professional or whatever the case may be. I think that that is one thing that's really important. But another thing is to really understand the root of your child's anxiety. Like you said, is it just situational anxiety? Are they anxious, over a test at school? Or are they anxious over, what decision they're going to make after they go to high school? Or anxious about, getting their first job? Those to me are more situational anxieties and a little bit easier sometimes to process and to understand and for as a child to deal with because it's coming to an end and you're going to get to that point where okay, I passed the test, or okay, I made a decision of what I was going to do, or okay, I got the job or I didn't get the job. And then you almost, it kind of, just the pattern of life kind of forces you to deal with it
Mm-hmm.
versus just overall anxiety, whether it's about life or your situation or anything like that. Those are a lot harder to deal with. If you're just a naturally anxious person, it's not going to come to an end, whereas, okay, there's no test to pass, there's no job to either get or not get. So I think that that's something that's really important as a parent is to understand, the root of your child's anxiety
Mm-hmm.
and then go from there and just being a listening ear for them, being able to offer help when you can, being able to get them services or help that they may need.
Mm-hmm.
I think all of that is very important as a parent when you're trying to help your child.
And there is a lot out there as far as resources are concerned. And it's just being willing to have that self awareness, like you talked about, knowing when you're in over your head as a parent. I think sometimes, you kind of, and I've had this experience multiple times as a parent where you feel like you're sitting on a fence, right? And your child's exhibiting this behavior, and they're like, oh, is this something that we can solve internally as a family system? Or is this something that we need to see a therapist about? Or is this something that
Hmm.
we need medication for? We need to go see the doctor. Like you sit there for a little while trying to decide what the best course of action is. And in hindsight, right, as a parent, if you're newly going through this, like here's a little nugget of advice. You're listening to my podcast, so I'm assuming it's not unsolicited advice you're here. So I would err on the side of getting some professional help and then finding out, oh, you really don't need it, than to sit
Hmm.
too long on that fence when you have a child who really does need the help. Because if it is clinical anxiety, it is not going to go away on its own. And so don't sit there for too long. I'd rather you reach out and find a good therapist. We jokingly, my friends and I in a circle, we have our favorite therapist. And, we've joked with him about, hey, do we get a frequent flyer discount? Because you've seen all of us plus all of our family members, plus, like you find somebody who's really good. Ask some of your friends, ask people who you know whose kids have also been dealing with anxiety for that professional help. But I agree with you, Kate. You got to know when you're in over your head and be willing to get that help for your kid.
For sure. So, as a parent, if you could tell a young adult or kids how to help their parent if they're dealing with anxiety, kind of
Mm-hmm.
flipping the script. If you're a child, I think that, there is kind of that certain boundary of, okay, you're obviously,
Mhm.
you don't want to put the stress of your anxiety on your 10-year-old. But, once your kids do enter that young adult, the whole point of having that family unit is to be there for each other and to help each other when you can. So, do you have any advice or anything like that of as a kid, how you can help your parent
Mhm.
who has anxiety?
Yeah. Well, kids are not stupid. And so even if you don't admit to your kids that you're anxious about something,
Hmm.
they are picking up on it, right? It's coming out in your behavior. It's coming out in your patience level with them. It's coming out in you being shut away in your bedroom. It's coming out in a lot of drinking too much. Like there's a lot of ways, right? That
Hmm.
behavior can come out. And sometimes even those behaviors are seen as healthy. Like there are a lot of people who exercise to relieve their anxiety, and that can turn into exercise anorexia, right? Like there's things that can happen with even perceptively healthy behaviors, right? There are things that bad results that can come out of that. So I think, you're not protecting your child if you're not willing to discuss that with them.
Hmm.
So, your kids know, they know if you're having anxiety. So if you are a kid and you see that your parent is anxious, and you need to understand, number one, it's not your problem to solve. Okay. Your parent's problem is not your problem to solve. However, you can be there as a support for them. Now, support doesn't look like you not telling them about your problems because you don't
Hmm.
want them to have anything additional put on their plate, right? That is their job. They are your parent. And trust me when I tell you, as a parent, it would make me more upset if Cade was struggling with something and he didn't share it with me because he didn't want to add something to my plate because he was sensing that I was anxious about something. I'm going to be way
Hmm.
more upset that he didn't share it with me. And then I'm going to be really worried about our relationship and about Cade because I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, no, he doesn't have me to come talk to. And so it's a whole vicious cycle, right? So make sure you're
Hmm.
still sharing your stuff with your parents. But there's little ways you can help out that you maybe wouldn't think would have a big impact. But things like maybe playing with a younger sibling for a while, or offering to run to the grocery store for your mom, or emptying the dishwasher, or taking on pet care, or there's little things that you can do physically that don't involve you solving the problem for them or addressing exactly what they're anxious for, but you can just make their daily life a little bit easier, which gives them more energy, right? And more power. I also think it is okay for kids to say to their parent, hey, mom, you're seeming really anxious. Have you talked to anybody about that? Like,
Hmm.
again, not taking it on for yourself, but just making a suggestion. Now, you may have a parent where that your relationship is not currently in the state where you can have that conversation. But there may be other people in your life that you can share the fact that you're really worried about your parent, and maybe that person can facilitate a
Hmm.
conversation with the parent, not calling you out as the child, saying, "Oh, well, Cade came to me and said you're acting, all flipped out about something, and so now I'm coming to you saying." But they can say, hey, how are things going? Is there
Hmm.
anything I can help you with? There's ways that other adults in your life can help you as a child to be able to make sure your parents doing okay, right? Again, like Kate said, as your kids get older, like we are a family unit and we are doing life together. Now we've gotten to the point where Kate, being the youngest, is 21. Like we are all fully fledged adults, right? In
Hmm.
this, and we are helping each other out with stuff. When I'm anxious about something, my kids and I are sharing that. Same thing when they're
Hmm.
anxious about something. And whether that's with each other, whether that's in our group chat, we have one-on-one conversations, we have conversations with each other, but you can rely on the other people, in hopefully in your family unit, and if not in your birth family unit, then in your family by choice, which to us means like the circle of people that we've surrounded ourselves with. Now
Hmm.
these are trusted people. Not everyone deserves to hear your story, right? It's people who have proven they deserve to hear your story. But I would say as a young adult, if you want to help your parent out, you can do some simple things. You got to realize it's not your problem to solve, and then definitely seek out the help of another adult if you can't approach your parent directly. Hey, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about you. I know you've been, let's
Hmm.
say, looking for a job for 6 months, and I know you're really stressed out about money. Can I make dinner tonight just to ease things up for you? Like that goes a long way in just making your
For
parent
sure.
know that they feel seen, which that's important as a parent too, to feel seen. I think I know a lot of parents who feel like their kids just take them for granted, and they're a source of money, they're a source of time, they're a source of attention, but they are human. Your parents are human too, and are dealing with
Hmm.
exactly the same stuff you are. So knowing that and letting your parents know that, I think is important for sure.
For sure. And like you said, I think that it's important too that I think this goes for both parents and kids or friends, family, whatever, whether it's anxiety or depression or anything, or even just they're just going through a busy time in life. Helping doesn't always look like solving that exact problem. Kind of like you said, if your parent is anxious or they're depressed or they, like I said, are just going through a busy time or they're just not feeling the best or whatever the situation is, it doesn't always have to be you doing something that specifically helps
Mhm.
with anxiety or specifically helps with their mental health. It can be things like, oh, if they if you're the oldest and your two younger siblings are still at home with your parent, taking them out for a night and just letting your
Mhm.
parent have that night to themselves and do whatever they want to do. That might look like your parent taking time to catch up and clean the house and cook dinner and blah, blah, whatever. Or that might look like your parents sitting on the couch and just watching their favorite show that they haven't watched for weeks because they've been so busy. So I think, like you said, it's important to know that there's different ways that you can help. And those little things, much for you to take on, but it can make a big
Mhm.
difference in someone else's life.
Yeah, and I know, like, you guys you would sense, especially when I was working for a nonprofit that required a lot of hours every week. It was a very stressful situation most of the time and very long days sometimes. And I know there were times when you were much younger than big, you were still what I would
Hmm.
classify as littles, right? I would come home and the whole house would be cleaned. And you would meet me at the door with, pancakes and an icy cold beer for dinner, right? Nice combination. But like
Uh-huh.
that meant more to me than anything. So, sometimes, especially when you have more capacity as an older child, even than that, the things that you can do can really have a big impact for your parent. And I've seen you guys, like, even among siblings, if one of you is having like a really bad day, like I've seen you guys Venmo the other one money for coffee,
Hmm.
like, hey, go buy yourself a coffee today. And that to me just warms my heart, because my favorite part of parenting, and I may have said this before, is watching the relationship between the three of you, because I am not
Hmm.
always going to be here. Sad, I know, but I'm not
Yes.
always going to be here. So I love that you guys have developed a system of being able to
Hmm.
be interdependent, not codependent, but interdependent, and support each other in ways that are really important. And they don't have to be big things. They don't have
For
to be
sure.
big things. Now, I also know that if one of you thought another one of your siblings was dealing with a clinical anxiety, you would say to them, hey, let's look at where we can get you help,
Hmm.
right? Like, you would step into that role. So even if I didn't know it as a parent, I fully have faith that you guys would be stepping in for each other.
For
Um,
sure.
and if you don't have that type of a relationship with your siblings, one of my favorite words is yet. You don't have that type of relationship with your siblings yet. You can recover from any bad juju that's gone on if you both are willing to come to the table and figure out what a healthy relationship looks like for you. So
Hmm.
just a little blurb over there for, increasing those sibling relationships. So,
For
kid,
sure.
what things do you do that help relieve anxiety, whether it's situational or elsewise for you? Can you just to give some people ideas of where they can start if they're feeling anxious today?
Hmm.
What is something that works for you that they could maybe try and have luck with?
For sure. I think one thing for me whenever I'm generally not an anxious person just in everyday life, but when that situational anxiety does creep up, the first thing I really like to do is kind of sit back and spend some time with myself, whether that is just sitting on your bed or going for a walk or whatever, and kind of do like a little self-evaluation and figure out this can be hard to do and it's definitely not easy, but figure out what you're anxious about, why you're anxious about it, and what you need. You might need to just power through and get it done. If I just went through a really busy time at work and I really knew the only thing that I could do was just to power through and get it done. So I just kind of kept my eye on that light at the end of the tunnel and just worked through it, and now I feel so much better. And so I kind of sat back and figured out that's what I needed. I didn't need to really talk it out with anyone. I didn't need to take any really action steps besides just powering through it. So I think that it's really important to just kind of sit back and figure out what you need. Do you need to talk to someone? Do you need to go for a walk? Do you need to, go get your favorite fast food and just, watch your favorite movie and sit on the couch? Whatever it is, I think it's important to figure out what you need. But for me, my favorite things to do to relieve anxiety, like I said, spend time just with yourself, go for a walk, work out. That's, one really big anxiety reliever for me. Talk to someone, whether it is a parent or a sibling or a friend or family member or anything like that. Talk to someone, sometimes even just getting that anxiety out. Sometimes I've even told you before, "Hey, mom, I'm
Mhm.
not really looking for, a solution to my problem, or I'm not looking for your advice. I just need to tell someone what's going on and get it out." And sometimes that is just an anxiety reliever in and of itself, to get it out of your brain. And there's even been times too where I've come to you and said things, and as I'm telling you what's going on, something clicks in my brain, and
Mhm.
I'm like, "Oh, this is what I can do to help relieve that," or,
Mhm.
"I can move this around in my schedule so it'll give me more time to study for this or that." So I think that that's something that's really important, is just to figure out what you need and figure out what works for you. Like, I know one of my sibling loves to like go on a hike when he's feeling like there's a lot going on and just kind of take that time in nature. Another, my other sibling kind of just likes to chill out and just relax and take a second to breathe and then get up and kind of power through it. So I think that it's really important to figure out what works for you. But with that being said, mom, what do you have as far as what keeps your anxiety in check, and what tools do you have for that?
Yeah, so I try to do a lot of preventative things. So I have a really strong morning routine, which this is something that's been new to me over the last couple years, but religiously when I get up in the morning, right, there's coffee involved. And usually just one. I hold my second one for later in the day, but there's coffee involved. There is dim light involved. I light a candle. I journal. I have a journal prompt that I do every. I read 10 pages of nonfiction in a day. I might add in some somatic yoga. I might add in a walk, just depending on how much time I have. But what I have found is those healthy habits, those rituals. I don't like the word I don't like the word habit necessarily. I don't like the word routine. I like ritual. It is my morning ritual. I'm honoring what I need and it gets my head and my heart in the right place for the day, right? If I
Mhm.
skip that and then life throws me some shiz during the day, like I'm not going to handle it as well as I would have
Mhm.
handled it had I taken my time in the morning. So for me, that proactive use of personal time is really important to me. I also try to get plenty of sleep. I try to control, the caffeine intake that I'm taking in. As you get older, it's not as effective as when you were younger and it's a
Mhm.
little more dangerous for you. So I try to, try to maintain that, just making some good healthy choices. Cade mentioned he'll go grab fast food. And now at the point I'm at in my life, I'm like, okay, what are the healthiest choices I can make right now? Because I'm at a different place
Mm.
in my life. My body does not metabolize food the same way that Cade's does. I also don't run marathons. So there's a difference there, right? So I
Mhm.
try to choose healthy choices, right? I will call a friend. I will do what's called a brain dump where I sit down and like Cade said, he verbally will just get it all out, right? And usually leads himself to his own ideas. I tend to
Mhm.
do that through writing. There is something about hand to paper with a pen, right? Ask Cade, there's 1,800 journals around this house. Like they all have a
So
different
many.
purpose. And every time I go to the store, there's probably another cute one that I need. But I just love to get it all out on paper and come to my own conclusions that way. So I will do brain dumps that way. If I'm in a highly anxious like situation and I'm stuck in the middle of it, like I give myself permission to like get up and leave the room. Like if you
Mhm.
need to get up and go to the bathroom to kind of regain your composure, and then I will sit and I will do 4 count breathing or I will do some sort of brief meditation. I am really good at envisioning myself sitting in an Adirondack chair on a beach and being able to actually hear the ocean when I am 3 states
Mhm.
away from the ocean. But I have taught myself to do that through repetition and through time. So I can rely on that when anxiety is creeping in. But you have
Mhm.
permission to get up and leave a space if things are getting tense. If you're anxious about a conversation that you have to have with someone, a lot of times I'll do this where I run through 5 times. Okay, so you have this conversation and this happens. Like you think of the worst thing, right? And you say, and
Mhm.
then what? And so, okay, then what happens? Well, that's bad. And then what? And you like follow it all the way to the end and you realize that you actually have a really good track record of things working out okay. And
Mhm.
what you're, getting all this anxiety about this situation in your head, like the likelihood of any of that happening is so low and things are going to work out. And so that does sometimes come with life experience, but it also comes with that ability to just put myself in that situation. So I've
For
tried to
sure.
teach myself a lot of things. Sometimes I've kicked my Diet Coke habit, but
Mhm.
sometimes, where is it? Hiding in my blurred screen. But sometimes you just need a Diet Coke. Like that's just now I could have worse vices, right? But
Uh-huh.
that's my vice. And sometimes it's just a pick me up. I will go pick up one of our dogs and just snuggle with them. Like I will go sit in the sun and just soak that in. And it can be as little as 5 minutes, right, of quiet to kind of calm yourself. I have
Hmm.
used supplements before. I've never had to have pharmaceutical help with anxiety, but and I'm not gonna, go into what supplements you can do. If you want to know what I use, just DM me and I'll tell you what I did use when I needed it. But your doctor can tell you too. You can find online all kinds of recommendations. But like there have been times when things have been really anxious in my life. And so I've had to use supplements to help kind of bridge that gap for me to get me in a good headspace. And most of that was prior to me having these other healthy preventive, what I call preventative anxiety prevention strategies, right? But people are key, being able to, reach out to my friends, being able to talk to my husband, being able to, reach out to my kids, I'll send them, hey, I'm anxious about X, and they'll send me some goofy meme. And I don't feel dismissed. I feel seen and heard, and they made
Hmm.
me laugh, right? That's a really big job of all three of my kids, is to make me laugh sometimes if I get a little too serious. So those
For
are kind of
sure.
the things that I have in my toolbox. Anxiety is no joke. It can make daily living uncomfortable at best, right? It can be dangerous if it goes unaddressed. It can be all consuming. It can overshadow your other emotions. So in the movie, it did show the main character, Riley, who was a young girl, 13, showed her having a panic attack. And I really felt like the movie did a really good job of addressing the complexity of us as emotional
Hmm.
human beings, and that all emotions are valid, and showed how anxiety can take over, but showed what a panic attack looks like. And Riley's parents were not present in the situation when this was all going on, but it showed how she was able to come back from that, right? And how her other emotions were able to step in. So, those emotions are all valid, all important. Anxiety can make it difficult for your relationships, and it can make for a really complicated life if it goes on unaddressed. I know a lot of people who isolate when they get super anxious. They will just isolate and withdraw from their friends and withdraw from life and only do what they have to, which is possibly one of the worst things they could do. Like, it's one thing to take a little break, like Kate said, and reflect and sit with yourself. For those of us who are introverted extroverts, I'm very friendly, I'm very outgoing out in community, but people drain me. If I'm in large groups, like, don't take me to the county fair, don't take me to an amusement park. Like, people just exhaust me in those types of situations. And the way that I regain my power is by being by myself, right? So I'm calming my nervous system. And so that looks very different than someone who's isolating and withdrawing themselves from anything and everything that
Hmm.
everybody that cares about them. So I would highly suggest, fill that toolbox with your calming self-care activities. You got to try them ahead of time. You got to figure out what works for you. When you are in the moment is not the time to figure out how to do short count breathing. Like, that's not the time to figure that out. It's going to work best for you if you practice. Find empathetic and supportive friends and family, a good therapist, and medication as needed, just to help you calm that chaos. So as a parent, remember to keep the lines of communication. I know we say that word over and over again, but boy, is it the key to everything we talk about on this Raising Bigs podcast. But keep those lines of communication open with your young adult. Share your stories of anxiety with your child, especially the times you've overcome the anxiety, or the times that the things you were anxious about didn't end up turning out badly, or even the times they did, and how you rebounded from that. Like, you are not perfection, right? But a lot of times kids, if they don't see parents making mistakes and they don't see parents as human because their parents have never shown them that side of themselves, you're perfectly imperfect, just like your kids are. You love them because of that. Let your kids love you as a perfectly imperfect human. That's really important. And don't pretend your life is all sunshine and roses, because that doesn't do your kids any favors. Like, they need to know that you've made it through tough times too.
For sure. And if you're a young adult, just remember that it's not only you that deals with anxiety. Talk to your parents, talk to your friends, talk to people around you. You never know what other people have gone through and how they're able to help you. And if there are safe people for you, make sure you go to that, even if it isn't a parent or it isn't a sibling. If it's a different family member, if it's a friend, if it's a therapist, whoever it may be, just find those people that are a safe space for you and be able to express that. And reach out to a trusted friend or a family member, like I said, if you need to get help, because there's no reason to suffer alone with the common experience of anxiety. Almost everyone has experienced it to some level. And it's important, like I said, to get it out and think about what you need and how to help it. And you don't just have to live with it and suffer through it. We are all just ordinary humans living in extraordinary times. And it can be anxiety producing for a lot of us, for sure. Like I said, whether that comes in small bits and just situational anxiety, or it's overall just general anxiety in your life, it can definitely be a big difference. The more we talk about it, the more we can just help each other, and the more that it is an open conversation, and the more that it allows for us all to heal. And do you have anything else to add, Mom, while we're on the topic of anxiety?
No, I would encourage you, if you're curious about anxiety, go see the movie before it leaves the theaters. It was pretty cute, but if you have open conversation with it about your kids, Kate is right. Nearly everyone has dealt with either situational anxiety or clinical anxiety at some point in time. It is a common experience among us all, and talking about it will help us heal for sure.
For sure, for sure. Definitely a great movie. But with that being said, this is a wrap for this episode of Raising Bigs. Thank you all for listening today. We hope you found some takeaways, a fresh perspective, and even an action step or two in this episode that'll help you create that open conversation and help you maybe deal with some anxiety if you are experiencing it, or to help someone else who is experiencing it. Above it all, we hope it opens an opportunity for conversation between bigs and their parents to have conversations about their daily lives, their struggles, and the good times as well. We are definitely not experts, but we can authentically share what we're learning in hopes of making the path a little bit easier for those who are listening. Like I said, we're not experts, but we've gone through some things and we'd like to share our knowledge to make it a little bit easier for you. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Please subscribe and share it with those in your circle who you think might benefit from hearing it, or you think would just enjoy listening to our podcast. A new episode comes out every Monday, and again, it is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube.
So you can also visit my life coaching website at marcyhawkinson.com or email me at lifecoachmarcy@gmail.com. I'm also on Facebook at Life Coach Marcy and Instagram at life_coach_Marcy. Where can our listeners find you, Cade?
They can find me across all social media platforms at DK Berrigan, just DK Berrigan. Again, that is my handle across all social medias. The best way to contact us, whether you want to give us feedback, ask us questions, or drop a topic idea for this podcast, is to DM either one of us on social media or to reach out via the contact me page on my mom's website, which again is marcyhawkinson.com. We appreciate any feedback, topic ideas, or questions you may have. And with that being said, we'll see you next time on Raising Bigs.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.